Young people getting addicted to their smartphones is rapidly growing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Scorpion Movement podcast. It appears we have somewhat of a full house today, as two of our panelists, Pearson and Raphael, have returned and have joined us today for this special episode with Alexis Pareja. We have a very, special introduction for you today, brought to you by ours truly, Jordan, who has invited our guest on to have a discussion about everything from the esoteric to music and sort of the subjects in between that I believe that we can touch on quite easily. Nevertheless, this should make for a very interesting episode, and I'll hand it over to Jordan, if to sort of introduce our
Yeah,
guest.
no, perfect. Thanks for the introduction. So, as is usually the case with this podcast, I prefer to allow our guests to do most of the work when it comes to introducing themselves for a variety of reasons. But even then, I'll still begin here by way of making clear that you, Alex, are primarily a guitarist, you're a musician, a songwriter, among other talents. And over the years, you've played in bands and projects like the legendary The Number 12 Looks Like You, as well as more recently Voice Kaleidoscope and the Composite City, if I'm right about that, in addition to working in other domains of life beyond music. So, with that being said, I provided that just for the sake of the audience and allowing them to actually get a better feel of who you are and what you do. But of course, I don't want to put words in your mouth. So, take the chance really to introduce yourself and explain what you do to the viewers, to the followers of the podcast in greater detail. I mean, you can really expand on this for as long as you'd like, be as detailed as you'd like, or be as simplistic and minimal as you'd like.
Well, hello everyone, and my name is Alexis Pareja, as you guys said earlier, and I am a writer and composer, and my band is The Number 12 Looks Like You. Yeah, I'm in New Jersey. I'm a music teacher as well, so I teach a lot when I'm not touring. And what else? Yeah, that's the main gist of a lot of the things that I do. I mean, there's lots more to, that I probably am doing, but I'll keep it minimal for now.
Yeah. Well, there's also the yoga, right? The Kundalini yoga. Is that
Yeah,
another?
yes,
Yeah, I
I
read
also
that on.
do.
Yeah,
I teach yoga as well. I've kind of slowed down on the teaching yoga just because I haven't really had much time. But prior to COVID, I was teaching full on for like 5 years. I'd be teaching at a yoga studio, and that was really, yeah, I love teaching yoga. That was also a very integral part of my lifestyle. Um, but now I mainly keep the practice more to myself, and if some time opens up at some point, maybe I'll teach a little on the side.
yeah. That's great. That's great. We can definitely talk about that in more detail later on because I wasn't really aware of that until recently. But then when I clicked on your website, I saw the yoga section. There was Kundalini yoga, there was tantric yoga, I believe. There was guided meditation, all of this. And I actually saw that you were offering classes in the past, which is pretty interesting to me because obviously I'm more of a novice in those areas. You're definitely far more versed in it than I am. But I
Mm.
have had at least somewhat of an interest in that area of life and of spirituality for some time now. So that would actually be really interesting to get into. And we have talked about authors who touch on those types of themes in this on this podcast in the past. Actually, I saw on your website you have a Carl Jung quote. I mean, he's a guy that we're actually into, definitely. We've talked about him in the past. But to begin here, because we can touch on that later on. So when I talk to people, not just musicians, but anyone who's involved in some type of creative field, oftentimes like to go back to those first childhood moments in which something clicked for them. And perhaps they didn't fully realize at the time that they were destined, you could say, to pursue this domain of life. But nonetheless, they experienced some sort of realization that made them think, okay, this could be interesting. This could be something that I want to pursue in life. This could be special. So I was wondering, was there any moment like that that occurred in your early life in your childhood, some type of formative moment that really drew you to whatever it was that you ended up doing? I mean, for instance, actually, to give an example, I watched an interview, I listened to an interview of one of your good bandmates, Jesse Corman, who I was supposed to have him on the podcast, but he just hasn't gone back to me yet. And he actually talked about how his first exposure to music was Michael Jackson. Obviously, nothing like the music that he ended up playing later on, of course, with very few exceptions. But it was that was the formative moment for him. And then from there, he never really looked back. So I was wondering if you had a similar moment in some sense, or if it was maybe a bit more diffuse and spread out. But what really got you down on this path, following this path in a sense?
It was probably an evolution of things. when I was younger, I was surrounded a lot by my father's music, which is a lot of Colombian music, a lot of Latin American, like either salsa or vallenato, probably more vallenato and cumbia, and a lot of Colombian kind of folkloric music. So I grew up listening to that stuff, just that being in my environment, and a lot of that music's very rhythmic and just very enjoyable to listen to. During that period, as I was finding the my own kind of stuff that was maybe more, I guess, related to my generation. At that time, I started to really get into a lot of, well, I got into a lot of 80s rock and stuff from through my cousins. So
Mhm.
I definitely remember having vinyl records of like Skid Row. That was like one of the earliest kind of vinyls that I remember having, and Guns N' Roses and like Cinderella and kind of a lot of bands like that that just
Those types of bands.
yeah, I remember having like Iron Maidens, like Seventh Son of the Seventh Son, like that was also like, I mean, I would just look at those albums and be like, wow, this is so amazing, and just be, I think a lot of those albums for me were more, they had this kind of air of mystery to them. I was like, some of that music was maybe darker or kind of just had a certain kind of mystical energy to, or esoteric energy, I would say. Bands like that, like Iron Maiden or Black Sabbath later on and stuff like that,
Mhm.
or Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
So all those bands for sure were coming on my radar at a young age. But then when the 90s came around, I that stuff really resonated with me even more because I think that was a lot of the 80s rock was more, had more of like a party vibe, and just drink and get girls and all that stuff, and just the more the glamorous glam rock kind of lifestyle that came along with like Van Halen and all that, which I love as well. But then the 90s kind of had a related a bit more to my some of my adolescent angst, I guess I would say. So Nirvana and Alice in Chains and all that. But I do remember like Soundgarden definitely being really influential, like when I was young and seeing the video for Rusty Cage, and that just like blew my mind, and I was like, whoa, I want to rock like that. So
Yeah.
Soundgarden, Rusty Cage was huge for me, and then just anything that came on after that. Like I got really into alternative and grunge, and that whole era definitely was my era for sure. But like I said, I grew up a lot with the 80s stuff was probably what contributed to my interest in, I guess, guitar pyrotechnics and all that stuff, and
Mhm.
went through my phase of wanting to shred.
Shred guitar and all that.
But
So there
I,
you'd say, oh,
but
sorry, go
yeah,
ahead. Yeah.
that wasn't like like I said, it's like an evolution of things, I think that there was always music and art and stuff around me, and then I just really started gravitating to heavier stuff, but I just didn't have a an idea that, oh, I'm gonna do this, because it's it's hard to just even get into. I mean, you just don't know. You're a kid just trying to figure out. You're just like, oh, I don't even have a band. Like, how do I start a band? And we just, it was just random how we kind of started. So yeah.
I see. So it was a bit more intuitive, basically. You were just getting into the artists and musicians that you liked, and you think that shaped you over time, pretty much. That's a better way to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I just what I loved listening to, and then once I had guitar in my hands, like I was starting to play I was just trying to learn the riffs of the bands that I liked, or I was listening to. So it's as simple as that. Like I was probably just happy enough playing a cool riff that I liked. If it was like a Metallica song or something, oh yeah, and then you show your friends and like, oh, like you're playing Metallica. That's great.
Yeah, so the influence is basically accumulated over time, you could say. Because you mentioned that, so first you were exposed to Latin American music, Colombian music, and I'm reasonably familiar with Latin American music because I do actually like a lot of it. Although my taste leans more so towards the flamenco nuevo side. People like Paco de Lucia, his renditions of songs like Malagueña. I don't, are you into him at all, or that's what I'm more familiar with. But I love that style of
Of
guitar in
course.
particular.
I
It's
mean,
huge.
Paco later on was a huge influence for me too. And any one of those guys, like the there's a very well-known album that's the San Francisco Nights, which was Paco de Lucia, Al Di Meola, and John McLaughlin, and that album is phenomenal. So, and it's just got the playing on that is fairly otherworldly. Like it's just incredible, and to just
Wait, that's John McLaughlin from Mahavishnu, right? Mahavishnu Orchestra.
yeah. Yeah, so like their playing on that is just they were on fire at the time, and I think that they were really at their peak, and they still continue. I mean, Paco passed away, but I got to see Paco de Lucia before he passed away, so that was like uh beautiful for me because I got into his playing when I was a lot younger, and then to be able to catch him at least once, it was definitely mind blowing. And I've seen all those guys. I've seen Al Di Meola. I got to meet him. I've seen John McLaughlin on the Farewell Mahavishnu tour. Um, so yeah, those guys were all that stuff came a little bit later though. I think that was more in my once I was kind of diving deeper into guitar and stuff. So
Yeah,
I
that's
think prior
interesting.
to that, I was definitely more into just rocking, just like the aggressive riffs and just
Yeah, yeah.
stuff. So
I mean, I think that type of music, some of the flamenco nueva, people like Paco, and then some of the fusion artists that you mentioned, like the jazz fusion players like Al Miola and John McLaughlin. I think people are probably inclined to get into that type of music a little bit later on, just because it's so much more technically challenging. And I think you really have to develop a bit more of an ear for it. It's not super inaccessible music. I mean, it's not really abrasive, but there's definitely an emphasis on technical difficulty, on the virtuosic playing that I think some beginners, that literally beginners on the guitar, just don't resonate with to the same extent as someone who's a little bit more advanced in the guitar journey. And that's actually how I discovered those types of artists as well, because I've been playing the guitar for some period of time and I wanted to improve my chops. So I figured, okay, well, what's the next step basically? And what's harder than this? What's harder than these rock songs? And then I found those types of artists. But but you mentioned two other genres that, because that's when it comes to Latin. I mean, I know Latin's a super broad term, but I love so much of that music. But those are definitely some of the styles that I'm more familiar with, as well as the Latin percussion, like I think the congos, bongos. I love artists that use those types of instruments and actually can play some of the Latin hand drums. I mean, I'm not some god on those instruments, but I'm pretty good at instruments like bongos and congos. I think they're actually really interesting just from a rhythmic perspective. So that's how I know Latin music. But you mentioned two other genres that I think you said are Colombian. It's a type of Colombian folk music. Is that because your parents are from Colombia, or is that?
yes, but so both I'm Colombian. Both my parents are that they're from the coast,
Oh,
Cartagena, Barranquilla. So that's my background, for my ethnic background. But the yeah, I grew up going every year to Colombia, and I would spend my summers there. So typically what's you hear anywhere in any neighborhood or you go anywhere down there, you're gonna hear vallenato or salsa or any one. Those are all very common types of things you're gonna be here. I mean, back then, I mean, still even today, I was just in Colombia a couple months ago. So like everywhere, like especially on the weekends, you just hear systems that are cranking, blasting music everywhere. So like,
yeah.
so it's very common to be hearing that kind of music around. So there's
Mm.
a Colombia in itself has a lot of its own types of genres of music, depending on the region. So if you go to the Pacific area, that music's going to sound different. You have the coastal music that's also folkloric, kind of like I was saying, vallenato is a very common one that you might find in places like Valledupar. Um, bullerengue, that's like another style from Colombia. Mapalé, like all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's many very genres of that are just in Colombia and from like a lot of Afro-Colombian, um, I guess the Afro-Colombian diaspora and stuff. So
Yeah, that's great. So that type of music was playing around the house when you were growing up, right? You'd say that that had somewhat of an influence on you.
yeah, yeah, for sure. My father liked to collect records, so I was into.
Jordan, I think it's kind of wise to sort of let Raphael
Yeah,
and
you
Pearson
said you,
interject with
yeah,
any questions in case they
yeah.
have any.
I can let
Because I
Pearson.
think we've covered a lot of ground relating to like early influences and whatnot, and there's a lot to contribute here around the entire panel.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, well, if Pearson or Rafa, or I mean, I guess even you, but if you guys want to go ahead, then sure. I've obviously been talking for a while, but
Y-
there's a lot to get through here, of course. So
Yeah, well, I kind of had a similar experience, not one to one, obviously, but I remember I must have been like 5 years old on the bus, and I heard I'd never been really exposed to a lot of great music. I was mostly hearing like top 40 stuff, and then I'm on the bus and I hear this song, and it's by Phil Collins, right? And then ever since then, I kind of started listening to Phil Collins, Simon and Garfunkel, the Beatles, stuff like that. Eventually got into like Pink Floyd. And then by the time I was like 8, and then when I was like 10, I found this record, and it was In the Court of the Crimson King, and my musical taste kind of exploded. Then I started getting into like yes, Genesis, but also like Mahavishnu. Henry Cow is one that I still really like. I mean, I still like King Crimson and everything, but Alan Holdsworth. And then I started getting into recently. Well, I might have been like 16. I'm 18 now, so I got into Shostakovich, Bartok, Eric Dolphy, Mingus, all that kind of stuff. And the Phil Collins and the Beatles stuff still is like a big influence on me, even though I pretty much never listened to it as much as Stravinsky or Bartok or Shostakovich, or as much as like King Crimson or Henry Cow. So yeah, that was pretty much my evolution as far as influences. I think you can somewhat hear it still in my music, although uh, maybe the Henry Cow is drowning out Phil Collins, but it's still somewhere in
yeah,
there, you know.
yeah. I mean,
What about you, Jordan?
yeah, you're asking about my influences, how I got into music and all that. I
Yeah.
mean, man, I've talked about this before, probably at greater length on past podcasts. Definitely in the one with Charlie to some extent. We did two with Charlie Looker, and then more
The
recently
one
on
with
Colin.
Colin Marston, you were
Yeah,
talking about it for
I
about
definitely,
three hours.
I think I covered that pretty much that exact question on the podcast with Colin Morrison. I mean, I don't want to take up too much time because it's a long story and there's so many. It's not a completely linear story because there's so many different branching paths, and sometimes I go back to music that I used to like, and but to provide a brief summary, and also so that I don't just hog the time here, I'd say that I think I can relate to both of your stories in some sense, but there are definitely, again, as you said, actually, in relation to Alex, it's not one to one. There are definitely some differences that make mine as opposed to someone else's. But my first exposure to music, I mean, I just absolutely love the music from a very early age. Any type of organized sound, I was pretty much obsessed with. So whether it was coming from the radio, from something that my mom or my dad, well, not my dad, because my dad is not musical at all, but my mom is much more musical. Whatever it is that she would play around the house, literally anything, I just immediately gravitated to it. So I was never really snobbish about music. I mean, that's also a bit of a weird term to use. But in terms of first organized exposure, my parents just signed me up for piano lessons when I was 6 years old. And so very young, I'm actually really grateful to them for having done that. And I started off playing very simple songs, just really the basics, the standard beginner piano repertoire. I mean, just extremely simple, probably not even worth mentioning. Played some classical songs, played some film soundtracks, that type of music. And as I got more and more advanced, the types of pieces that I start to play became a bit more personalized. So I just worked through these different, well, first of all, on the non-personalized side, I was working through these piano repertoires, some of the Hanon books, those types of works, which are really common. But then also my own taste started to develop, and I was getting to somewhat jazzier material, just because I like that it was a little bit more tonally rich. And actually, what's funny, Pearson, not to we can talk about this at length later on, and maybe Alex can jump in as well, because I know Alex, you actually teach guitar. But what I like about what I don't like about some earlier classical pre-20th century is just that the tonal and harmonic sophistication isn't really there. And that's why I always gravitated towards. I know that sounds people are gonna hate me for saying that, especially the snobs and all that, but because for some people, you just that's pretty much the holy grail. You can't. This type of statement is blasphemy. But I do think that in terms of harmonic complexity, oh, and definitely rhythmic complexity. If you look at jazz fusion, pretty much any jazz, with some exceptions from the 20th century, it's just so much more rich. So I thought that a lot of classical was a little bit limited. And the classical that I do like is actually that 19th century, 20th century work. Composers like, as you mentioned, Shostakovich, Stravinsky, Bartók. But I think my taste would be actually even more a bit more extreme in that regard because I like a lot of just the nonsense, like Ian Xenakis, Arnold
Yeah.
Schoenberg, shit like that. They're really crazy guys in the 20th century. I do like them a lot. But obviously, I wasn't into that at the time. And so my tastes were becoming a bit jazzier because I like that tonal exploration. And then at some point, again, I'm trying to simplify it here because there's so many different details, but I just got into metal pretty much at some point because there was this forum that I was using about a different topic, not music, but there was a music section and people were talking about music, sharing tracks. So people were just people were sharing their taste, posting clips, YouTube links to YouTube videos. And there was this one guy who posted this song actually, Slaughter of the Soul by At the Gates, which is a really huge melodic death metal band. I mean, probably one of the biggest in that genre. And yeah, it just blew me away. I think that was, again, this is gonna sound a bit corny and melodramatic, but that was a huge moment just in my life. I know it sounds so dumb to some people. I mean, you just heard some melodic death metal song. How is that such a huge moment, especially compared to other people's huge moments? But I was only 8 years old at the time, so it made a huge impression on me. I thought it was brutal. The riffs were awesome, and just I loved it, everything about it. And then I just went to the metal rabbit hole pretty much, going from thrash to death to grind. But grind was a bit later on. But you start with one genre that's a little bit less extreme, and then from there you actually gravitate to the more extreme genres, just because of it's almost like a not the term treadmill is not correct here, but you almost progress in stages because you eventually get used to one genre in terms of extremity, so you want more later on. So I was just getting into metal heavily, but I got into prog at some point because there was this kid in my class who was making fun of me for liking Cannibal Corpse. Nah, he wasn't making fun of me for liking them, but because he liked them a lot too. But he'd say, "Bro, you got to get on Dream Theater and shit like that." And he's yeah, and a kind of a corny ass band, bro. But and he was saying, "No, you know, John Petrucci's the best guitar player alive. He can shred so much faster than the guy in Cannibal Corpse." And we just have really fun. He was the only guy I knew who was actually into music, like me, who was really into it. And he was just, or he was a little bit cocky, but he was a really funny guy. And so I kind of tried to copy him in a sense. I don't know, it's just dumb adolescent antics, but I copied his music taste. And I did actually develop a bit of an affinity for those types of prog bands. And that just led me down the prog rabbit hole. Never really looked back, but I went through the
Yeah, I
prog
mean,
metal bands, prog
I
rock.
have to ask,
Yeah.
Jordan, I have to ask, what forum were you on at 8 years old? Was this like the Roblox forums, the Lego forums?
No, it's kind of weird. I'm already gonna mention it here. It was just for a
Okay.
bit of a niche interest. No, it was for people who liked zoology.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was like a life science type of forum, yeah.
Okay.
And I
Well,
was really
yeah.
it's not cringeworthy, but it's not fucking Roblox.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, but
Well,
because I don't want to see, it's weird for me to say all of this here because this is not it's not really my time to shine. But you did ask me about it, so okay, to really just hit the brake, to hit the accelerator pedal. Yeah, I got super into prog, but I started out with more recent acts, and then from there, people say, "Oh, if you like prog metal, you should listen to prog rock because that's where it comes from." So I just went back to the 70s pretty much, which is where it started. And there was specifically one list that's fuck. This takes me back to so many good memories. But when I was about, I think I was 14, there was this Rolling Stone list called Top 50 Prog Rock Albums of All Time. And yeah, King Crimson was in the top five. Yes was there. Mars Volta was there at some point. I just got into all of that. And obviously my tastes have been more expensive since then, but I think to keep it brief, that was basically from 0 to 14, first 14 years of life.
yeah.
But
Well,
yeah.
Jordan, to be honest, you're not known for keeping it brief, but
I'm
um
sorry, man. Yeah, I was
no,
too
it's
long.
fun. It's fun, but yeah,
Yeah, and a different context would be
when
better, but
Yeah, when I was playing guitar when I was little, I started at 9, I wanna say. I was playing, like, a lot of, like, Beatles stuff, and then, I got into King Crimson and everything, and then I heard if you've ever listened to Starless and Bible Black, which was one of their albums, I listened to Fracture, and that just blew my mind, and ever since then, I've been trying to learn it. Ever since I was, like, 12, I've been trying to learn it, still can't play it,
Bro, I could play
but
it at
that
14.
Huh?
I could play it at 14. I mean, not the flicks. I don't,
No, you couldn't.
that,
Okay,
yeah, I
stop.
could. I swear, yeah. Honestly, I don't think that it's that hard. I don't really want to sound
Okay,
like,
but
but yeah,
here's the
go ahead.
thing,
Sorry, my
is,
bad.
like, when I listened to Fracture and I heard Robert Fripp's playing on that, I was like, "Holy shit. I need to, like, make this my career. I need to pretty much dedicate my life to studying music," and, it's sort of panned out that way, but not completely. Um, but it's actually kind of like a story that Robert Fripp told where he was, like, 15 and he was playing like jazz gigs and he heard I think it was Day in the Life by the Beatles and that completely like blew his mind and he started just dedicating himself to music instead of studying law I think it was.
Yeah.
um, so Alex, when was like the moment where you pretty much decided that you had to be a musician instead of being something else, being like a tradesman or a lawyer or anything?
Well, there's not any, it's never been a decision where I'm becoming, like I'm a musician or so. That's not something that like I decided in any sort of way. I just continue to do it. I think that I'm a lot more than just a musician in my life, a lot of other things that I put my hands into. So it's, being a musician is, I think, difficult just in and of itself because it's very tough to make a living in this kind of field, being that there's not, yeah, unless you really are touring 24/7 and most of the year and you got other avenues where you're marketing yourself or creating in different ways and having different output, then you're able to really do something there career wise. But these days you really have to kind of do it all, not only make the music and write and all that, but you got to be able to do the business side of it too. So it's not just a matter of making music, because that's one super small piece of it, but you have to really be able to handle all the other business side of things, and that in itself is also very difficult, and try to balance all those hats. So
I'm actually struck by how often the musicians that we seem to have on our podcast say this, because recently we did an interview with a Swedish sort of punk, post-punk musician named Hugo Daniel, and the one thing that he went about on for 20 to 25 minutes was how about a lot of people who get into music, they seem to have this idea that they'll sign with a label and that will be their great achievement, and they will make it big as soon as they do. They'll form their band, they'll do an independent act, they'll, master the instruments, and as soon as they've done that, it's only a matter of time before people realize how great their music is. But he focused on how so much of actually making it in the music scene for the past 20, 30 years has essentially just been like handling the business side of things, handling how are you going to sell your product, where are you going to advertise, are you going to use social media to some extent, are you going to sell physical copies at all, are you going to be old-fashioned, or are you going to do it online? His approach mainly has been to like release singles. He kept on approaching it in the manner that back in the olden days, it'll be far easier for artists to release albums since they were already signed and the music would get out in albums. It will be sold physically like that in stores. But how, because of modern day algorithms on websites such as Spotify and Apple Music and other listening platforms, they just sort of tend to prioritize singles. So that's very interesting that you managed to bring this up, Alexis. When you look at like the music scene today, what are the biggest differences that you yourself see back from, when you were starting?
Well, the model in general has changed greatly, as far as I mean, we probably caught the tail end of actually having a physical medium of that people would pick up, being CDs. Maybe we've done some limited runs of like tapes and stuff that
Yeah.
cassettes have kind of made sometimes for those collectors. It's just more of like a limited thing. And we of course sell vinyl, so that still does relatively well for us because we do like limited runs of a certain vinyl, but of our albums. But a lot of it's changed, the just everything from the venues, well, for everything from the way people get their music to the venues to the labels, the merchandise, everything, like the whole thing has just changed. So it's completely different from when we started out. A lot of stuff, a lot of the shows we used to play sometimes were little venues that were local, maybe like BFW halls,
Yeah,
uh, people's, basements or whatever, house shows we've done
house
like way
shows, yeah.
back in the day.
Um,
Um,
and the
they're
trailer
fun.
shows as well.
It was fun time to. There's a lot of, I guess at that time we didn't really think too much about certain consequences or really needing money that bad to try to like, now as you get older, you just have more responsibilities, more things to really try to be handling. So that, I can't really be going around playing for $100, or something like that. It doesn't really pay the bill. So that's kind of there's other ways to do things now, and and once again, like the model just has changed for, lots of venues. Like it's hard when you go play in the city, we're in Jersey, so you go over to the city, you're paying like, well, if you go with a van or something, you're probably paying like $50 in the tolls just to get over into the city. And then plus maybe parking, you probably get a parking ticket somewhere out there. And then you got to deal with merch cuts and all kinds of stuff. So you get a huge chunk coming out of your guarantee already. And it's just, yeah. So there's a lot of different things. It's not, I think you definitely got to, a big part of you has to love what you're doing in order to hang in there because it doesn't get any easier, that's for sure.
There's so much I could say about that just to expand on those topics, but when you say that the model has changed, what exactly do you mean by that? I mean, I have an idea of what exactly it is that you're getting at, but
Mm.
you said that the way that people relate to music has changed, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah, well, the model in general with like you have most of the people are listening now to some sort of streaming platform. So
Yeah,
when you're listening to playlists instead of an album, it changes your whole relationship to the music, because it's very different from, let's say, you get when you're young and you get let's say the Beatles, Sergeant Pepper's or something, you listen to that whole album from front to back and you just have that kind of an experience with that album. It's very different. You just hear one song and then all of a sudden Joni Mitchell's playing, something completely different, or maybe some hip hop track, or whatever. So it's very different in that sort of perspective. Like you don't really sit with the music that much. And I can see that in the way like younger audiences and stuff there. Not only that, but you have a huge saturation of any kind of genre of music. So if you're into, black metal, shoegaze, whatever, it's there's probably like a whole subgenre of that and people that like listen to
yeah,
stuff. So it's every single one of those genres is saturated with ton of bands and artists that are doing that kind of thing, and then it all gets mixed in, and so I think that waters down when you years ago, decades ago, you would have maybe a handful of artists that were like the main artists that like everyone was listening to. So you know, back in the 60s or so, you got like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and you know, those main bands. But there wasn't like, you know, thousands of bands now. Like you turn on Spotify, it could go anywhere. So it just kind of, that whole model just changes, I think, the experience of how people consume music, and it becomes more like that, more of a consumption, which is really, in my opinion, just it makes it a lot more disposable. So people pay attention less, and like audience pays attention less, and it just it becomes more superfluous, like in regards to like what you know what it just kind of sets gets put into the background, right? So that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, it you know, it'll be cool for like a week, and then all right, what's the next thing? Maybe even a day. Like some people don't even listen to things for a week anymore. So,
Yeah,
so
that's
in
true.
that sense, it's I think it's very different now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree that people are increasingly listening to music as background noise nowadays. You're not really getting as much of the focused listening, which is, to me, is where music really shines, and it's how you actually develop a proper relationship to music. I mean, I wouldn't really have been the not only the guitar player, because that's my main instrument, but I don't like to reduce myself to that, but the musician that I am nowadays, if I didn't actually listen, as you said, to albums from front to back. And all, even though, music aficionados, I think people who are really into it, not just people who appreciate it when it comes on, but people who actively seek out new music, will probably never the majority, even in the past, in areas where perhaps it was a little bit easier to do that in some way, or not easier, but where there was more of a culture that facilitated that. uh, I think that you still need to do that in order to actually really develop an appreciation of music. I mean, you can't dive deep into it if, as you stated, all that happens whenever you listen to music is that you put it on in the background. It might be pleasant in the moment, but then that's it. It just fades into the background noise of your life from there. And I do agree that, I mean, well, I do agree that that's more prevalent nowadays, that mode of relating to music. But I would also add that I think that stems from multiple factors that are probably worth investigating. And I think that actually, that decline or that change in how we relate to music probably relates to some of the other changes that you were talking about with respect to venues. VFWs are not closing down, because I remember, well, obviously I'm pretty young and I'm much younger than you are, but anyone can look this up and see that 20 years ago, or even 25 years ago, 2000, 2005, or maybe even the mid 90s, late 90s, which is when probably your main band, I think, was very active, obviously, because we can talk about the history of the band later on, but I think Number 12 formed in the early 2000s, probably. And you definitely were playing those types of shows, the more local shows, the more the DIY spaces. Those types of spaces were far more common and prevalent in the past, I think, than they are nowadays, because many of them are just closing down pretty much. And it's not just a result, or it's not even a result, I think, at all of a lack of interest, because the interest for the music, I don't think, changes that much. And I think there are always people who are going to remember it at the very least, even if they're not actively seeking it out right now. But I think the changes reflect the fact that the world is becoming more bureaucratic in a sense. And there are all these agencies, there's these regulations that make it super hard for people to actually set up these types of venues. You have cops shutting it down all the time. I mean, that was probably happening in the past as well. I don't really want to put on the rosy red glasses to, to reference that album of yours. But I would say it seems more prevalent now, and it seems more worrisome to me. I'd say, and I do miss so many of those DIY venues. They used to be more accessible in the past. But even if you look beyond DIY, for instance, and just look at places that facilitate the opportunity for people to view or to engage in underground music, just any type of venue that's dedicated to this type of music, I think those places are on the decline as well. I mean, they just keep closing down. So I'm in Miami. I don't really know if you've ever been here. The city is pretty terrible for a lot, not just music, in my opinion. But when it comes to underground music, it's just a very unfriendly place because there are barely any venues. And the venues that do exist just shut down. I mean, we had this legendary venue called Churchill's Pub, which actually holds the world record, I think, for hosting the greatest number of acts to ever perform in a single venue. So it was really influential, very interesting place, huge for DIY, punk, experimental, hardcore, metal, prog, pretty much anything that you can name that's a bit more under the radar. But they shut down in 2020 because of some type of disagreement with the landlord. There was this really greedy guy. I'm not really going to dive into the details because it's not necessary here, but after COVID, some guy wanted to take over the property, so he filed some type of complaint, ordinance complaint, shut it down, and apparently they're turning into a Chili's, which is just screwed up to me. Yeah, it's just screwed up to me. But it's such an absurd story, but at the same time, I think it's very exemplary of the direction in which we're headed. And since then, more venues keep closing down. I think it's not just my city, it's probably affecting other places as well, though with certain exceptions, because I think actually to tie this back to Pearson, I mean Pearson, I think it's okay if I say that you're in Virginia, in the
Yeah.
Richmond area. Actually, Richmond has a pretty good scene from what I know, and they've always had a really good music scene. You guys had that strong DIY culture. Miami doesn't really have that. It's just a different type of place, culturally speaking. But even a place like New York, I mean, you'd think that
Yeah,
New York City's
I'll be
probably
right back.
Oh yeah, okay. Okay. I mean, yeah, well to explain, you'd think that New York City is the epicenter of these types of spaces, but as we talked about with Charlie Looker on that last podcast, St. Vitus, which was this legendary venue, closed down.
New York
And even
City
the
has
Yeah.
DIY
actually a
space
pretty good
closed down.
underground scene because of how big of a city it is. Whereas in Miami,
Mhm.
like Miami has a relatively small population and people only go there. It's like white girls going for raves because they're
And
like
like
moving down from
BBL
Boston and like their
shit.
boyfriend doesn't even know they're like there. It's just situations like that.
No, I
Yeah, I
I
will
don't
mean,
say
think in a
the rave culture in Miami is actually pretty legit. Like I don't think they're
it
posing
is.
because
I'm saying it's the
I
number
went
one
to
city for
like
raves.
oh for sure. Like I went to a rave with my friend like a week ago when I was there and I was like, wow, like this is a rave. Like these people are
It
the
is.
ones carrying the culture on.
It is.
Um
No, in
like you
Miami,
can tell
definitely.
when
Yeah.
there's a difference between the people who are doing it to look like they're doing it and the people who are actually a part of it. And it just felt so authentic. So I have to give it credit there.
No, all
yeah,
of Florida, I would say, is like very, very big into raves. But as far
Yeah.
as like an underground music scene of like, the same kind of shit that you would see in like Brooklyn or New York generally, like there isn't anything like that in
Yeah.
Miami because it's just
No,
so
but there's a
focused on
place.
like the very hyperactive lifestyle, like the entire definition of the character of the city.
That's the thing, because we don't really have like a rock or jazz culture. Like New York, London, like cities like that have that, but like Miami's
London
just a
definitely
different.
does. They have like underground
Yeah,
bars and shit, dude.
Miami's just based in. It's because it's a party city, and party cities are bigger into electronic music, I think. And then you'll get raves at party cities, but like cities like New York City, London, kind of have a more diverse scene, right? Like they have raves, but they also have the kind of rock aspect of it, I guess.
Yeah, and it's also the fact that like 10 million, over 10 million people live in both London and New York City, which is that's like a huge metropolitan, like world-renowned city. Whereas,
Yeah,
Miami, 500,000 residents, I believe, like in Miami itself and in the metropolitan area, it's
Yeah,
just like over a million, which is a
yeah,
big city, but it's just,
um,
it's not comparable.
yeah.
yeah.
you'll
I
definitely get a
mean,
lot more
what
diversity.
what
Yeah, man.
Jordan was talking about earlier, I would actually tie that less to bureaucratic issues and more to, this kind of thing that I think Robert Putnam talked about a lot, as well as
Yeah.
Panidi Linkola, where like you have the internet, and because of all these algorithms and stuff, people's interests are hyper specific, right? So there's instead of, back in the day everybody was into like baseball or something, now you have all these like small niches of like jazz, like music taste or political theory or anything like that, where people get into like these niches where it's a less universal thing than it was back in, say, in the 70s, where just like everybody liked music. Now if you're into like, avant-garde black metal jazz fusion, you can find like 30 bands like that, but they all have like
Just named
100
you just named a
listeners.
band called Imperial Triumph, and yeah, they're literally that exact
Yeah,
band where yeah. No, but I completely agree with you. Actually, Robert Putnam's the guy who wrote that book Bowling Alone. I think that's what
yeah,
it's called. Right? Yeah, yeah, he's great. I need to read more of him, but and I think he talks about how the sense of a single unified society basically
mhm,
disintegrated over time. I think that's probably his main theme, right? So now people just
yeah,
retreat to the enclaves. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that makes sense. But there is definitely something that has to do that relates to the bureaucracies that I mentioned, cops cracking down on performances. It's probably always been like that to some extent, but it just seems more
yeah,
rampant now. But I think also the financial aspect is huge as well. And I think Alex was
yeah,
hinting at this because venues and these types of spaces are just shutting down, I think, in large part because they just don't make enough money. And it's a brutal cutthroat world out there, unfortunately. Alex mentioned that it's very hard to make money as a musician. Yeah, obviously I completely agree with that. But I mean, what do you think, Alex, about these themes? I know it's not a single question, but if you just wanted to expand on any of that, I mean,
Yeah, it's challenging to it in order to produce to get a record to do a recording of an album, for example, you at the very least on the low end, you're looking at, maybe 10, $12,000. That's on the very low end trying to get an album done. Mixing, mastering, tracking, mixing it, mastering, all that, and then if you want to do a music video or so. But, at the very least, that's like your lower range. Then you got people that are probably on average spending maybe 20,000 or more. So you got to try to recoup that money at some point. So that is usually takes a while. Some bands never break even with that. So really, like, touring is one of the more efficient ways of being able to make some profits, and that's not guaranteeing that like you're always going to have a great turnout or anything like that. I mean, if your band is doing well and it's got a big following, then of course, like, things can kind of sway to a better, like, a more positive profit. But, like, that doesn't there's a lot of overhead, where van rentals, equipment that breaks, all kinds of stuff. So it starts to add up. And so, yeah, touring, I mean, even touring is just very, I mean, I don't particularly like touring, so it's not necessarily, I like playing shows. I like to play and perform and stuff, and that's always great. But the touring aspect of it, sitting in a van for like 6 to 8 hours and doing overnights and stuff like that, is terrible. So it's not like necessarily fun.
yeah. What exactly do you mean when you talk about the difference between playing shows and touring? I mean, so obviously the transportation aspect is that's a huge part of touring, I assume, right?
Well, yeah, touring, so performing is, I enjoy doing and being able to play the actual show, but then all the in between stuff where jumping from one place to another, you're in a different city almost every night or every other day. That stuff is very takes a toll on your body. So over time, like, anything, like for us, for example, we generally try to aim for doing 2 weeks at a time, but one of the last tours we did was like a month and a half. So that's at our age, just starts to get pretty exhausting. So like anything over 2, 3 weeks, you're just like, get beat up. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
doing
interesting.
long tours.
And one of like, oh,
Yeah.
my bad.
No,
One of
no,
like the
go ahead.
only consistent ways for musicians to make a living, which would be like the symphony, the jazz orchestra, those are all on the way out because who goes to the symphony, who spends like $50 on a symphony ticket? It's not young people, it's like people that are in wheelchairs. They're frankly that market is soon to have no customers because just
I
that
mean, I think
population is aging.
Yeah, someone that went to the
I mean,
symphony, just in
and
the UK
those,
when I was there, like that is very much the case.
yeah, I mean, it's a lot of those orchestras though have funding from the state or so. They're good orchestras or so they get like certain funding and donors. But yeah, it doesn't have they probably don't have the demand as much as, like, well, a big market is teenagers, right? Like, so you go to see one of these bands that are, like, I don't know, like Falling in Reverse or whatever. I don't know too much about them or so, but like, they have a huge market of younger, like, it's a younger demographic. So you have a lot of teenage girls or whatever.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and that's a huge market. That's usually the biggest market. It's not, not going to see like a ton of adults, like, or people in their 30s and 40s. So
Yeah, I agree with you about
it's
that. Well, I think when it
still,
comes to, I mean, what do you guys, I guess we can use this. Obviously, I do want to dive into your actually, because we started off with an exploration of your, Alex, your musical story, how you were your journey, how you developed over the years. And I wanted to conduct more of a narrative there where we start with number 12 and then just see what happens from there. But for now, to stay on track and to really riff off of this topic, what if we just took turns basically, or not really take turns, that sounds a bit too formal, too forced, but I would ask, I mean, what do you guys think about the types of music that teenagers both listen to nowadays and have listened to in the past? Because I think there are actually some really interesting changes that have been unfolding within the culture for some time now. I mean, not an extremely long time, but for
I mean,
definitely for some,
inevitably, like
I
half of it
consider
is
a
going
period
to
of
be like
time
half of it is
that are
going to be
pretty,
like shit, and the other half is going to be something that will be picked up in 5 or 10 years, and people are gonna reflect upon it the same way that we reflect upon bands like Nirvana now, where they're like sort of embedded in the culture, and social media is gonna accelerate all of that. Uh, but I guess that's the only way that we can possibly answer the question. We can't like apply a broad general label to all music being made today the same way that boomers do when they say like, oh, like modern music is trash, and it's just like define modern music. There are plenty of artists that contributed to the musical scene in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and some of them still produce music today. So it's like define what that means, and usually these people cannot because they're broad generalizations. Um, I'm very much against like classifying the music, the label in of itself, like the music that teenagers listen to today. It's like which teenager? There are teenagers that I'm very sure listen to like classical music like Beethoven, and they go to the symphony orchestra every other week. There's just like 3 or 4 of them in the entire world. It's very like what do you mean like TikTok music? Like it's just a whole like genre, so many different genres, so many different people, so many different, characters and predispositions and these sorts of melancholic types of music, people that like very like upbeat, energetic sort of tracks. It's all over the place. But
yeah.
you can dig a little bit deeper into that, Jordan, if you feel like.
No, I was gonna say, well, yeah, those are some good points, stuff, and I agree with you in certain respects. Maybe not to the same extent in others, but what I was trying to get at, I think, just from my own perspective, and even though I do think that Pearson was hinting at this earlier, is I think for a long time there was this notion that rock had this dominant, you could say, hegemonic type of cultural influence on the youth. And I think that's actually being slowly thrown out the window. It seems to me as if rock is maybe losing some of its influence on younger generations. And that actually is a change that might have been unfolding for maybe a decade, 2 decades by now. A part of me thinks that it could be somewhat intentional on behalf of certain players within society, within the music industry. A part of me thinks that, hey, maybe people's tastes are just organically changing, not necessarily among somewhat older generations, not really among Gen X, because I do think that among people like Gen X, among probably most millennials, definitely among baby boomers, rock music and with it in many cases metal music still has that type of stronghold. It still has a very high impact and probably will never stop having a high impact. But I think if you look at the younger generations, it does seem like there's this major change. I don't know if people talk about it as often as frequently as they should when it comes to the genres and the types of music that they listen to. And it just seems like people listen to less rock, but not only that, or at least younger people, you could say, which I know is a broad term. We can try and define that. It seems as if you say younger people, maybe people under 25, under 30, are just listening to less guitar-based music in general. And it seems like that force, I think, is losing some of its power, which actually doesn't bother me to the same extent as I think many people uh, imagine it or would make it out to be. Because even though I am a guitarist, because at the end of the day, the craft is still there. And I think anyone who plays an instrument at a serious level will realize that it's pretty much timeless. I mean, there's never a limit to your exploration, to one's exploration of any instrument, and to a certain extent, I'd say. And so, regardless of whether it's happening, whatever it is that's happening around you, you'll still have those types of opportunities. Sure, some of the music that you like might be a bit more underground, and it might become more underground with respect to broader society. But again, at the same time, it probably was never even that dominant or commercially successful in the first place. And if that's all that you care about, I mean, do you even like music? You know, if you only like to listen to music that's very popular at the time, it seems like that's less about music and more about trying to cultivate some type of the image of your personality or of whatever archetype you're trying to fulfill. So that's pretty much what I'd say about that. I think that those are the main trends, and I do think that Alex was probably hinting at that. But I mean, Pearson, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely in a decline. Um, back in the day, there were so many bands that were out there, and kind of in an artistic rock direction, even in like the 80s, even to some extent in the 90s and 2000s. Nowadays, there are only like two bands that are like in the
Yeah,
kind of music that me and Jordan play that are, somewhat within the mainstream as far as, the youth that are somewhat artistically minded, being like Black MIDI and Black Country New Road.
yeah, I knew you were gonna say
And
Black
those.
Country New Road, yes, absolutely. I
yeah,
agree.
and besides that, um, everything is kind of obscure. Every kind of like new music that's coming out besides those two, at least in like an artistic kind of underground, that's kind of universal between well, that like kind of everybody that's in the know knows about. uh it's just those two. There's not a third band that even comes close as far as influence as in that demographic.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, Rafa, do you have something to contribute?
Yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
but no, the theme was observations about how music tastes are changing with respect to the youth, basically, and how it's pretty
Oh,
dramatic.
yeah,
It seems like
okay.
it's
We're
pretty
still on
dramatic.
that. Yeah, to be honest, I think it's kind of overstated. I think there's a very common pattern that happens, right? There's like kind of like new wave music, and there's like teenager people in their teens and 20s are always into kind of a sort of music that older people in the 50s and 60s don't really respect. Like when you say that like symphonies are getting like filled up with like older people, or only older people go to symphonies. I think it's just that people tend to enjoy symphonies more when they're older. Um, like I think there's always been kind of this mainstream kind of you had the Beatles in the 60s and like classic rock, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd in the 70s and disco in the 80s, right? And then it's always the kind of the younger generations who are the ones feeding into that. And we see the same thing happening today. It's a new genre always, right? It's always a new artist, a new face, but the pattern pretty much stays the same. And then by the time 20 years passes, those new bands become what the older people listen to, and then someone takes their place. And then the music that's actually good, I think as like when any sort of music first comes out, it always falls into that kind of overlooked category, something that's kind of destined to be with the younger generation, something that's not as respected, but um, it always goes through the test of time, right? Like you can only actually tell whether or not music has any worth, any impact after 40 years. Because if people are still listening to it, that means that it's not something that either caught onto a trend or something that was just shocking in the moment, but something that, you know, has worth, that is not intrinsic to the generation it came from or the kind of culture it's a product of. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, people who like certain aspects of music but dislike others probably probably will like whatever it is that they already like, that's within that domain of, you could say, the musical world, without ever experiencing significant changes. And that's regardless of whether whatever it is that's happening in the mainstream or in society around them. I do agree with you right about that. And I definitely think that
Yeah.
when it comes to aesthetics more broadly, there are these eternal, more platonic qualities that are basically timeless. And I don't want to sound too much of an elitist when it comes to this, but for me, for instance, obviously it's more of a personal taste. It'd be interesting to see how to see what you guys think about this. But I'm not really a big hip hop guy. I mean, I don't really, obviously, I don't disrespect people who are extremely into it. And there are even some rock artists that have tried to experiment with hip hop over the years. And there's been some cross-pollination between the two styles that you could say, not really in an interesting way, in my opinion, but it has happened in the past. It's still pretty marginal, though. I actually do think that the styles are pretty opposed to each other, seems like a bit of a controversial opinion. Nowadays, probably wasn't in the past. But for me, for instance, hip hop just doesn't really do it. I don't really align with it because it just doesn't really have what I look for in music, with certain exceptions. Because I like I mean, there's some hip hop artists that use interesting textures, but I like interesting textures, timbres, and more than that, I just really like, well, I like melody, harmony, which doesn't necessarily mean consonance because dissonance itself can actually be harmonized. And I think so. I think that's a bit of a misconception that many people have because obviously I listen to a lot of very dissonant, abrasive music. It still has some melodic qualities, you could say, in that sense. Also, and like I like rhythmic experimentation, rhythmic complexity, and I'm definitely pretty attracted to well to technical instrumentation, to instrumentations that's just very physically difficult to pull off, to virtuosic music. I think that's actually what attracts some people to rock and the metal in the first place. I mean, Alex, you mentioned earlier that you like a lot of the guitar virtuosos. That's I was absolutely hooked on that type of material when I was a much younger person as well. The shred guitar craze of the 80s, people like Yngwie Malmsteen, Richie Blackmore, Steve Vai to some extent. That entire trend, you could say, that the neoclassical guitarist, I thought was amazing. I loved it, and it really pushed me to actually grow as a guitarist and to better my skills. But I think that's generally what I tend to look for in music. And obviously, with certain exceptions, I'm not trying to box to reduce myself to some predetermined or pre-assigned category. And my tastes are probably more expensive than that. But I've noticed that when I analyze the music that I like, a lot of it does come down to, first of all, experimentation with, for instance, noise and those actual sonic qualities, but then note density, rhythmic complexity, some type of harmonic intricacy, harmonic complexity, and so on and so forth. Bands that use intervals in really interesting ways. I mean, some of the bands that Pearson mentioned, like Black Midi, they use a lot of really jazzy intervals, like major sevenths a lot that you don't really hear, and you just would never hear something like that in rap.
Guys, I
And
gotta
with
probably
few
run
exceptions.
soon, so I do want to, whatever other questions you have.
Oh, you said that you have to leave soon.
But
You're gonna have to
yeah,
run.
so we gotta
Oh
wrap.
yeah, but so that's what I think about hip hop.
Yeah,
And then when it
Jordan, you're
comes
not really well known for being very succinct
I
and
think
saying
Pearson
things
just
very briefly, but we
I mean
get the point of
my
your point, right?
responses were about as long I think as Pearson's and Rafa's were. But then the final comment I'd make there is also when it comes to lyrics, I mean lyrics aren't really the deal breaker for me, the make it or leave it. But I do appreciate them. I'm just not really a huge fan of hip hop
Yeah, we
lyrics.
should get the questions out of the
But
way.
yeah. But that's
Raphael
what
and
that
Pearson, in case
Yeah,
you guys want to contribute in any ways or ask Alexis any question, it's nevertheless a privilege to have him on because
um,
we never actually get the opportunity to speak about such topics and how they sort of interconnect with the general scene of music. So if you guys have any questions.
I do have a question. Yeah. You said, I mean, a lot of things have gotten worse over time. It's become what kind of more difficult. Venues have shut down, streaming's kind of fucked things up. Music has actually become kind of a more difficult industry to navigate yourself in. What's gotten better? Like, what are the kind of, yeah, new innovations, new developments that have actually made it a more exciting or more kind of an easier industry to approach, if anything?
As for, I think accessibility to certain, I mean, most people are able to probably record a pretty good record just in their own space. So that is huge. You know, you don't have to spend as much money as you did back in the day where you had to go to like a full-on studio and stuff. Part of the reason why a lot of big studios have closed down as well, because it takes a lot to maintain and run those studios. So accessibility to some incredible equipment and stuff, and have that in your own room, it's really helpful. And also being able to do a lot on your own as well, like putting out your own stuff and being a full-on independent artist. So there's a lot of tools to do that now. So those things help a lot, where maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you only had a handful of avenues where to get your music out. Now you could probably get your music out in front of uh, thousands of people just on your own. I think a good example is somebody like Tyler, the Creator. I think he like fully does all his stuff. You know, he owns his rights, owns all his publishing and all that. So
Yeah, it
that's
took a very long time for him to sort of take ownership over his work, though, because I do remember in the very early beginning, the like general like the Odd Future, the group that he was a part of, it was very much like signed and professional and whatnot. And I think a big reason for why he had left that was pretty much to
mm,
have control over the type of music that he makes. And more recently, he even like went with like putting his real name on stuff, like setting up companies to sell his own merch because he wanted to have creative control over all of that. And I think that's a really good example that you just gave.
I don't know too much about him, but he came to my mind. I thought he had pretty much started everything like from scratch up, so Ben released on himself. But I might be thinking of another artist as well. But there's a couple
Oh, a
of
little bit. Yeah, yeah. 100%.
there's a couple of those hip hop artists and other folks that kind of just did everything like and own everything. So There's ways to
Mm.
do that nowadays, but it's equally challenging. You got to find the niche or community or people that you got to stay. I think that's another thing too. You're able to, if you can really manage to connect with your fan base and stay in touch with them and make it something that is very personal, chances are you can grow that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find yourself taking advantage of that?
Us, I mean, probably not as much as we would probably like to. I mean, we're just so we all have a lot of other things we're doing and we're pretty busy. So I know I'm terrible at social media and all that stuff. So, most of our stuff is handled like our social media. Jesse will like do a lot of that and stuff. But like yeah, I'm not as good as some people are just like constantly posting and putting stuff out. I'm I just could barely hang on with that stuff. So
Yeah, I actually did want to ask a question very quickly related to that. How do you sort of balance like the general like day-to-day life as a music teacher with being an occasional like performing artist still to this day? Because this is something that you've been doing for a very, very long time. And it must feel like sort of challenging to like balance your late like daily life, personal life, your work with being this like creative person who works on these complicated projects that involve, as you said, like so much money in order to produce an album that you have to put in so much effort and you can't just settle for like low quality gigs. You have to actually have stuff prearranged when you do like decide to perform. How do you sort of balance these two? Because I know that's very difficult for a lot of artists, especially as they progress further in their career and they've been doing this for like 10 to 20 years, where now they have to balance this like whole extensive life outside of their art and their performance with what they're doing.
I don't even know, man. It's very difficult to really it's always the balance is very challenging and I've certainly sacrificed a lot of stability, if you want to call it that, for to be able to continue doing it and relationships and everything. So it's yeah, I don't know if I have particularly figured out what the balance is. It's always if I want to continue doing it, it's a matter of if it happens to line up at that time with where I'm at, then we could do it. But I think we contribute in different ways. So I write all the music and I'm constantly, focusing on that and stuff. And Jesse does a lot of the visual stuff and he works a lot with the music videos, obviously, and photography and all that. That's his camp and we communicate about that as well and talk about creative ideas with visuals and all that. But he has all the technical stuff on that side of the stuff. So yeah, maybe somebody else will help out with booking or so, or we all contribute in different ways. So
Yeah, everything in life's a trade-off, man.
yeah, so yeah, I certainly can't handle everything at the same time. It's
Hmm.
between just my personal life and then the band stuff. It's more than more than enough. So, but yeah, it's a challenge to balance. Yeah.
For sure.
Pearson, do you have final questions? I have maybe two questions. I'll try to keep them
Oh
somewhat brief. But
no.
after Pearson, yeah, let Pearson go. Yeah.
No, I
You
don't
said we
really
can
have
wrap
any.
this up. Don't
I
really
don't.
have any?
Yeah, I don't have any.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I mean, if we're trying to wrap it up, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, but so I guess two, there's somewhat more, well, they might seem to be somewhat more lighthearted, but I think they do actually contain a depth of seriousness within them. So first, I was looking at your Instagram profile, Alexis, and I found that you were actually talking about the benefits of cold plunges, and I was just wondering if was that just a more of a one-off post, or is that something you've actually been exploring? Because I'm pretty interested in those types of, I don't know how to describe it, but the wellness types of strategies. And I've heard people talk about cold plunges and all of that, but I don't even know if it's real. So
Yeah, I don't remember posting about it, but it is. I've gone through periods of time where I would do lots of cold plunges and stuff. So the part of the Kundalini practice and asanas and sadhana, and which these are all like meditative practices, is doing cold exposure or um, yeah, being able to expose yourself to cold water or immerse yourself in cold water, and then so only usually like 2 3 minutes or so, and to get the most benefits, and then it's good to like meditate, do breath work during that process as well. And so it, yeah, it has loads of benefits that you can definitely read up on, but it has benefits on your nervous system, your parasympathetic system, and your cardiovascular, your heart. So
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I'll definitely think about that. I mean, I've been trying to use some of the techniques that you talk about, but just on a very basic level, like meditation. I mean, I think that's not really that complex, and I don't have a very sophisticated routine, obviously, but I think it's probably good for people to at least do something as opposed to nothing when it comes to those types of practices. But
well, yeah, it strengthens your immune system too. So it's even just on a for your immune system, it's really
what does improve you? You mean meditation or
the
the cold,
cold exposure.
oh, the cold, yeah, obviously not yeah, the cold exposure, yeah. And then, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, that clears some of it up. And then for the second question I have, well, it's not really directly related to you in some sense, but I just thought maybe you know more about it than I do. But is it true that, because I was just really curious about this, you mentioned that Jesse does a lot of, and I know he's been in the number 12, looks like you for a long time as a vocalist, but you said he does a lot of photographer work right now. I was wondering if it's true that he was actually the photographer for AOC during one of her congressional runs, because I read that somewhere online. I didn't really know if it was actually legitimate. So is
It
that
was.
true?
Yeah, he did do her campaign. So when she first like was running, so he did her campaign.
Oh
And yeah,
wow.
and Jesse and I are both like we're the original members. So we've both been in it as long as the band's existed. So
Wow. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I didn't even know about that. It's crazy that
he's done a lot of great photo shoots. I mean, awesome with tons of actors and just he shot Hillary Clinton and stuff, even though she's a
oh
typical woman. But like anyway, that's a whole another conversation.
he did Hillary Clinton. Oh wow, man. That's insane. And he also not to talk too much about him, but is it true that he was also on the Terrifier movies? He was working on those?
He
Wow.
Yeah, he's done Terrifier 3, I think. I think he's doing the new one as well. So
Oh wow, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean that's pretty much all that does. I had no idea that he shot for Hillary Clinton. That's
yeah,
that's
you can,
insane to me. It's insane to think about that. Yeah. I mean that's
yeah,
pretty much all they had to ask. That was actually really interesting. Thanks for clearing that up for me. But I mean
yeah,
for anyone else, because obviously we don't want to take up too much of your time. But I think we basically said most of what needs to be said, I'd say. So I'll just pass it to Jacob then, with that in mind.
Dude, this is a very good pod. I didn't expect for this large of a panel of people to be able to have a calm discussion without, flinging shit around. So I'm very grateful that all of you were able to come, and of course grateful to Alexis that we were able to touch on so many topics. Uh, yeah, I don't really have any more comments to say. So unless Raphael or Pearson want to say anything, I just wanted to professionally, thank Alexis for being here and for joining us today, taking time out of his busy schedule to do so. And Jordan, I think you brought up a lot of succinct and interesting topics that I think I appreciate having been brought onto the podcast. We definitely saw a lot of commonalities between the sort of stuff that Alexis was covering in relation to how music has changed in the past several decades too. The sort of newer artists that we've been talking to and speaking about, I saw a lot of similarities with both the Hugo Daniel and the Colin Marston podcast today, but Alexis also brought a lot of very original thoughts. So, Jordan, unless there's anything else you would like to say towards the end, I'm happy to end it here.
I mean, yeah, we can end it. No, well, thank you very much,
okay.
Alexis, for coming on. That was great. Yeah, I mean, I love your guitar playing as well. So big inspiration, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.